You're listening to The Empowered Advocate, a podcast from Greensboro Pregnancy Care Center. Hey guys, welcome back to the Empowered Advocate podcast. I'm your host, Mary Holloman. And if this is your first time listening, welcome. We're glad that you're with us today. The Empowered Advocate exists to empower listeners to advocate for life at every stage. And we do that by covering a whole lot of different topics. We talk about abortion, adoption, biblical sexuality. And this month, today in particular, and for the whole month, we're talking about a subject that is very difficult and a lot of time is not talked about. But today we're covering pregnancy loss. And today I have two special guests with me, Josh and Kristi Tisdale. Guys, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. And so we're excited to hear a little bit about your story and to talk about this topic that, as we were talking before when we were not being recorded, that it's a silent sort of issue and that a lot of people are suffering, but maybe don't know how to share their story or if they should share their story. So thank you in advance for your transparency and being willing to share what you've been walking through, because I know it's going to minister to a lot of people. So let's just go ahead and get started. Share a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and then what has led you to this place with pregnancy loss.
Sure.
So I've lived here since I was 3. And we got married and moved to High Point and then to Summerfield. And we decided we were going to get pregnant. And then things didn't go quite the way we expected. But I'll let Josh kind of give the rundown of that.
Sure. Yeah. So I've lived in the area since 1998. Moved here, early part of high school. Had originally from Texas, lived in Florida for a while and then moved to the area and been here ever since. But yeah, like Kristi said, we got married in 2009. And then it was just a couple years in, we decided we were going to, start trying to build a family. And, with our first pregnancy in 2011, really kind of started this journey for us. In total, we've had 7 losses. The first one in 2011 was an ectopic pregnancy. So for those that don't know, that's, the baby's in the fallopian tube and, is essentially not viable at the time. So Kristi had to have one of her tubes removed. Then in 2012, the next year, we had an early loss over the summer. It was just, a few weeks in. But then in 2013, we actually, we had our daughter, Madison, she's now 6 years old. And then in 2014, we lost our son, Logan, at 18 and a half weeks. There was some complications and Kristi's water broke and there was some infection and she was septic. So she gave birth and he lived just under an hour. And then the following year, we lost twin boys at 8 weeks, one to a genetic issue, and then the other one, they're not sure. He was healthy up until the point that he wasn't. So, and then in 2017, our son Jacob was born at 22 and a half weeks, a very similar issue to when Logan was born. There were some complications that caused, her water to break. There was an infection. And in fact, we almost lost Kristi as well that time. She was in the ICU for weeks following that. But he lived, just under 4 hours. And then actually earlier this year in April, we had another early loss. So it's been a fairly consistent and long journey for us up to this point.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And again, just thank you for being willing to share these things. And I'm sorry that you've experienced those losses. So we know, and you can find this on Google, that 1 in 4 women experience pregnancy loss. So I think we know in our heads that it's very common among women and men, of course. So what led you to start sharing your story? What was kind of the reason behind that for something that is so common? Why did you feel it was necessary to start sharing that?
So for the first couple losses, we really didn't tell many people. We told our very close friends and family, especially because they were early. There wasn't really, people think they need to wait until the end of the first trimester because that's your safe time. But really, we've learned that there is really no safe time. That's just kind of what people have come to do. So we hadn't really told many people, and we just really didn't talk about it after that. And that was very isolating. I felt very alone. My sister-in-law is the only person I knew who had had a loss, and I just didn't really know anybody who had. And so we kind of just suffered in silence and tried to move on, which I thought was what people did. But we realized later that that's not really the healthy way to deal with it. But after we lost Logan, I just remember laying in the hospital bed, and I just had this urge to just get it out there. I just felt like I couldn't keep his story in. I felt like I needed the world to know that he was ours and he's part of our family, and I wanted people to remember him as part of our family. So I just quickly typed up what was on my mind and posted it on Facebook, and that was that. We from there have really just shared our story, and the response from that one post was incredible. I mean, I had all kinds of friends and family respond, and it was just like the beginning of the healing process.
Yeah. I think for me, the desire to share really came after, so after we lost Logan, it was months later, Kristi kind of brought to me, there was this group locally called Heartstrings. And she said, it's a support group. It's for people who have gone through loss. And I was really against it. I was just, the last thing I want to do is go sit in a group and talk about it. That's, I had been internalizing things through the first two losses. And, of course we had Madison at that point. And, it was kind of this major blow that, it was the last thing I wanted to do is sit and share. I don't want to sit and talk about it and kind of just wallow in that. At least that's what I thought was going to happen. But then, once we went, I kind of felt like, the least I can do in supporting her was to just go. And even if I just sat and listened, but to hear people's stories and to realize that, it is a community. I mean, it's a community that nobody wants to be a part of, but once you're a part of it, you recognize that these are people that understand, they understand how, it really is, you don't want to say look, if you haven't been through it, you don't understand, but it's true. You can have all the best intentions in the world, but you don't realize what it's like unless you've been through it. And so, talking about it every week, it wasn't something I was looking forward to, especially on the day of, it'd be like, all right, is there really, is not something else we can do? Or, I don't feel like going. But then once I'm there, it would, maybe be exhausting a little bit because that's kind of how grief works that, come to learn. Yeah. But afterwards, it felt better. And it really became therapeutic. And it was almost like the more we told their story, the more, the easier it was to deal with the grief.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's a great insight. So you mentioned that your response on Facebook and then getting connected with Heartstrings. It sounds like what you found was that a lot of people have experienced this. Why do you think that it's a thing that's not talked about much? What do you, personally, what do you think the reason is behind that?
I felt very much like it was something I did. I really internalized like it was my body that failed. Maybe it was something that I did, a lot of blaming myself, unsure of if I could have changed something. So I think for a lot of women, that's the initial response. And you don't want to share that because you're feeling like it's your fault or there's some kind of blame to have on your part because it was your body. And so I think a lot of women just don't bring it up because it seems kind of like a failure because that's, we think when you're growing up, you have what you want to do when you grow up and all of that. But really, a lot of women want to be a mom. And that's really the heart of what you think about in the future is getting married and having children. And so when that doesn't work the way that you thought it would, it feels like you've kind of failed at your job, what you were created to do. And so for me, I think that's why I didn't talk about it at first, because I felt like, I didn't know a lot of people in the beginning who had losses. And so I felt like there was something wrong with me. So.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, culturally, it's a problem that, everybody thinks, she mentioned it earlier. It's the, you don't tell people you're even pregnant until, you get out of the first trimester, you see the heartbeat appointment, or, there's all these milestones that are kind of these gateways to communicating, your pregnancy. And, when you think about it, especially having been through loss, it's kind of crazy that we've ended up in that place, because it's not like you weren't pregnant if you lose them before that time. So, I mean, it really has, especially once we started sharing, opened us up to, communicating earlier and more often. And, we've come to the point now where it's like, look, if we get pregnant, we're going to tell people. It's part of what we do now. So, that's allowing people in earlier in the process has been helpful, because then you get additional support.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think sometimes too, unknowingly, the implication when we wait longer is that, well, the life matters more later. Earlier it's fine. I remember, in my own loss, I had someone say to me, well, at least it happened really early, so you didn't get attached or anything. And that just tore my heart up. But we kind of do act that way when we wait and we hold off. And so that makes a lot of sense, what you're saying. So you guys shared your story on your blog. You mentioned it was first a Facebook post, but then you started a blog, and we will share the link to that blog in the show notes for those of you who are listening. And Josh, one of the things you wrote about on the blog after, your first experience with those losses was that you started to put up walls. And the walls just kind of kept getting thicker and taller and stronger. Can you talk a little bit about what you meant by that and about your experience with those walls?
Sure. When we first got pregnant the first time around, I'm fairly guarded to begin with, but I was kind of all in, and I had made that decision that this was it, right? I mean, this was starting a family, so I was talking to her belly and, just really interactive and just emotionally invested just immediately, ready to start making plans and everything. And then we go through the first loss, and there was a part of me that was like, okay, this was a fluke, this was a freak thing, ectopic pregnancy. It's not going to happen again. So I was more guarded the second time, but it wasn't that different. I still tried to be excited for it. But then after the second loss, it was almost like, that final punch that kind of pushed me over into, this, I can't put myself out there anymore. Mm-hmm. So then even with our daughter, when we were pregnant with her, I was emotionally guarded. I didn't want to be invested. I kept myself distant. And that was, the complete wrong thing to do. And I didn't even realize what I was doing at the time. But it really changed the way that I thought about the whole process of pregnancy and just how I communicated about it and how I talked about it. It was something that was like, okay, yeah, we're pregnant. That's the exciting thing, sort of.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that just kind of got worse as we progressed through our journey.
Gotcha. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said to love it all is to be vulnerable. And so that's what I'm kind of hearing, that knowing that if I allow myself to feel and care, I could get hurt. That makes a lot of sense. Kristi, for you, did you react in the same way, or was it differently than how Josh was kind of processing some of these losses?
So we're total opposites pretty much in life. And so same here. I was all in on every single one of them. I really just felt like, none of them really correlated. And so, which was frustrating because the doctor would always say, none of these go together. And so we don't really know what to tell you. But at the same time, I was very open. Like I said, I always wanted to be a mom. That's like doing any kind of job was my backup plan, really, or until I could stay home. And so I was really all in on every single one of them. And that was hard for me when he was being distant and had those walls up, because I felt like he was just not invested, which he was kind of not. He was trying to guard his heart, but I was so all in that it just felt like we were on very different pages. Like I didn't know if he even wanted to try again or have kids after all of that. And so I just felt very isolated again in even being pregnant, because I felt like I was the only one who was putting myself out there and excited. And, that got me hurt several times, because we have lost most of our pregnancies. And so I feel like I've maybe gone through the grief a little harder each time, because I was all in and kind of forgetting about the things that had happened in the past. But that's just kind of how I live my life anyway. And so, we were definitely on different pages for a lot of it, but
I'm sure this has caused both of you to grow, not just individually, but as a married couple too, just learning how to love each other through all this. Josh, one of the things you write about in the blog is how you tended to blame yourself sometimes for the losses because it gave you a sense of control. Can you talk a little bit more about what you meant by that?
Sure. This is actually something that I didn't realize until not that long ago when I first sat down to put the blog together, because it was trying to pull together these collection of Facebook posts that we had into something that was easy to share. And what really drove me to it was I told Kristi we memorialize a lot of these anniversaries by sharing something, but we never actually put together the whole picture. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to sit down and start writing it. And it's in no means done. I've only made it through the first two at this point. But it was when I was writing about our first loss that I realized that I had been, in the midst of these losses, like right as it was happening, especially with Jacob and Logan, you're looking for a reason, because often the doctors can't tell you why. It's just that there was a loss and something happened. Even with some of the ones that were, kind of more catastrophic, they still don't really know why. So I'm putting things together. Is it something we did? Did I stress her out? Did was it something we ate? Was it something, was there something that I did to make this happen? And usually that would fade, weeks afterwards, I would kind of get off blaming myself a little bit. But I've realized what I was doing was, you are so powerless in that moment. When you have a loss, you can't control anything. You feel like you're just completely helpless. And, especially, as the husband, as the man in the relationship, I can't do anything to protect my family. They're like, it is just happening and I have no control whatsoever. So in a way it was me putting it on myself, because if I can blame myself, at least there's someone to blame.
Right. Yeah. I remember, I think just a week or two after my losses, I lost twins. And I remember I was in the cookout drive-through and I was picking up lunch for my husband, and I wanted like a side of hush puppies or something. And I remember asking, can I just have a side? I don't want the full dozen. I just want the 6. And they were like, well, you can't do that. And I remember in that moment thinking, I just wanted control over something. And for me, it had to be the hush puppies. And so I went back and forth with this lady. She would not give me just the 6. She was like, well, we'll have to charge you. And I was like, no, I'm going to get my way on these hush puppies. And any other day it would not have bothered me. But that day it was just like I needed something. And so I can definitely identify with that. I need to be able to control something because everything else feels like it's spiraling. This has been really good, and we're going to take a short break, and then I want us to talk a little bit more about how your faith has affected your walk through these hardships. So thanks so much. We'll take a short break, and then we'll be right back. All right, welcome back to The Empowered Advocate. We're talking today with Josh and Kristi Tisdale, and they're sharing their story about their personal walk through pregnancy loss and just giving us some insight as to what that's been like for them and how they have found healing. So Josh, you write on the blog, you mentioned that there was something that started to put a crack in the tough exterior, the walls that you had built up. Talk a little bit about that. What was the turning point for you?
Sure. It was really, where I wrote that was kind of at the end of the account of our second loss. I had really kind of hardened myself to, withdrawn emotionally. I was really kind of turned inward, and as part of our daughter's pregnancy, which was our third pregnancy, I really wasn't really wasn't there as much. I wasn't as invested. And then really there's two things when I said that I was thinking about. One in general, and then a specific thing. In general, it was the birth of our daughter. When you're going through this, especially, of course it's new and you're still kind of figuring everything out. It'd been 3 years and we had been through 2 losses already, and being so closed off, I didn't want to open myself up. But then when she was born in June of 2013, it was really, it was eye-opening. I'm standing here, holding her, right after she was born. And it's like, look, she's life itself. This is, she's made in the image of God. And it really, at that point, it was like, you know what, there's nothing you could put me through that would make this not worth it. And the specific event that kind of set me on that trajectory, this may sound a little strange, but so a few weeks before we found out the gender for Madison, before she was born, I actually had a dream. And I'm not one of those people who is like, oh yeah, dreams are always meaningful and there's always this stuff. Yeah, it's just like, I'm usually very analytical, very, kind of logical in my thinking. She can attest to that 100 times over. But I'm also somebody who dreams, like if I'm asleep, I'm dreaming. Like that's just a normal thing to me. So it wasn't odd to have a dream. But what was strange is that it felt completely different. It was so real, and it was like I was present. But what it was is that I was standing in a room, and there was a little girl standing on a chair, and she was trying to get my attention, and she was maybe 2 or 3 years old. And as I was looking around, I knew her. I didn't know exactly how, but I got the sense that she was mine. And as I stepped towards her, I woke up, and it didn't feel like anything I'd ever felt before. It was like I was still present. It was almost like, usually you wake up and you're groggy and, forget the dream in 30 seconds and it's not there. But it was like I never had even been asleep. It was like I was just present, and I could remember everything to this day, exactly what it looked like, exactly what the sensation was. And, I told Kristi, I was like, I think it's going to be a girl. And then it gave me the sense that, it gave me the feeling that God was trying to tell me that it's all going to be okay, that even though it was painful, that at least this time it was going to be okay. So then, of course, after Maddie was born, and going into our subsequent losses, my perspective had totally changed. The walls were still up. That hasn't changed. Even today, when we find out we're pregnant, there's not excitement there. This is the next step in our journey. So grief changes you, and it never really goes away. It just becomes a part of who you are, and you learn to cope with it and deal with it and move forward, because you're never not a parent.
Right.
Once you lose a child. So yeah, and that's really what started me on that path.
Yeah, that's powerful. And it's really neat to hear how God works in different ways to like whisper to us his presence and that he's with us. And so I love hearing how God did that in such a unique way for both of you. Josh, obviously I can just see just from talking to you and hearing you that for both of you, this is something that still affects you, moment by moment, day by day. And I think it's important to talk about this because I think the grief that the fathers experience throughout this process is sometimes forgotten or maybe even viewed as not as real. Josh, what advice would you give to men who are experiencing this loss and maybe not sure what to do with the emotions and the feelings that come with it?
Really don't hide it. I mean, it sounds like the simplest answer ever. But it's so hard in the culture that we have around pregnancy loss to, especially as a man, you don't know what to think there. Do I even bring it up? Is it something, you want to just put your head down, go to work, keep yourself busy, stay occupied. It catches up to you. Like you can't run away from it. So the biggest thing is just don't hide it. And the other reason why that's so important is because the way that we interact with our wives is, for most men, the instinct when you have a loss is I need to be strong. I need to be the one who's solid. I need to be the one who, she's upset. Mm-hmm. So I need to not be. And, I found out years too late that I was causing more harm than good doing that. I was quietly hurting. She didn't see when I was, in tears driving to work, but I would have it together at home and she would be upset. I didn't know that she saw that as what's wrong with me? Why am I still hurting and he's not? And when she finally, I don't even know what finally brought us to it to talk about it. But when she finally told me that, I felt terrible because this whole time I thought I was doing the right thing. I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, which was being strong for my wife, when in reality, she wanted to be there with me. She wanted me to be in, share my grief with her through the process. And it was so unnatural. Like it wasn't what I was, almost conditioned to do, which is, be the strong one. And then really lastly, as a man, don't think of it as a sickness that you get over. Grief isn't something that, has this beginning, it happens, you go through this process and then it's over. Because you can have a pull to make it procedural to, all right, what's the next step in the formula? But like I said earlier, it doesn't go away. It isn't something that you need to try to cure in you or your spouse. So there will be times when your spouse is hurting more than you are in that moment. And, then there's times when, you'll be hurting more, and not feeling like that there's something wrong with that is really important. And communicating that and just let your spouse know, look, I'm not doing well today. Especially around, anniversaries and, important dates, grief can cause tension, even if there's no reason for it to, it can make things difficult.
Yeah. So it sounds like being transparent with one another about what you're feeling and being willing to grieve together and hurt together is huge, which you're right, does seem counterintuitive. I think our culture really feeds us that idea of like, men shouldn't hurt as much. They should take care of, make sure everything is back to business as usual. And
I think the other point that's important for men to understand though, and this is maybe the one caveat to all of that, is your wife is hurting more than you. It's one of those things, just like those who haven't been through loss don't truly understand. As men, we can't know what it's like to lose a baby that we were carrying. And there may be some times when, your wife is grieving in a certain way. And it might be helpful just to remember that yes, we went through a loss together. And yes, also there's an extra piece to it that she's having to deal with.
That's good. That's good. Well, Kristi, there was a part of your blog that I read, and I want to read part of it now because I think it's very powerful. And then I want to ask you to talk a little more about it. So you wrote, quote, "I have experienced more loss and grief in my lifetime than my worst nightmare could dream up. Yet, mingled with that, the most incredible joy and hope in the Lord." And that is a very countercultural thing to say. Like, the world looks at what you guys have walked through and says, how in the world can joy be in that anywhere? So talk a little bit about how your faith has intersected with these losses that you've experienced.
So for the first 2 losses, which equates for like the first 2 years, I was very angry. I have been a believer for most of my life. And I really felt like God let me down. Honestly, that's kind of what I felt for the longest time. I was pregnant with a best friend and my sister-in-law during those losses, and it felt very unfair. I was just really bitter towards them at times, towards other people. Just the whole thing just seemed really unfair. And so for those couple years, I really just let myself go down that pit of despair, some self-loathing because I didn't have what they had. It wasn't until we lost Logan that I really hit rock bottom. I was just really at my lowest after I lost him. I was recovering from being septic, so I was really sick still. I had gone through another loss, even though we had had a healthy child previously. And I just remember one day, she was really little. She was just over 1. And I was having to go back to normal life because I had a young child to take care of. And I was struggling to do that. I'm really struggling to do just my everyday activities. And I just cried out to the Lord. And I asked him, like, are you here? Like, do you see my pain? Do you see me? Because I don't feel like you do. And I took Madison outside. It was a pretty day, and I took her outside to play, and there was a little heart-shaped leaf right on our front doorstep. And it was just immediate. I mean, it was within a few minutes of me just crying out to the Lord and bearing my soul to him. And I just knew it was from him. There were no leaves on trees or bushes in our house or near us that had those leaves. And I just knew that that was him telling me, I see you and I see your pain and I'm with you. And so that was really the turning point for me and my faith, that even though I would not have chosen to go through any of this, that the Lord saw me and he was with me. And I knew that no matter what was coming after that, that I could walk that path with him if he was walking it with me. And so for all of our subsequent losses, I have just had that hope that he sees me there. He's been with me this whole time. He did also give me a promise that our family would expand after we lost Logan, through some verses that people sent me. And I wholeheartedly believe that. We've gone on to lose several babies since then. And, I thought every time that it was going to be the fulfillment of that promise, and it wasn't. And even through that, though, I can see that the Lord has used these losses to grow our faith individually and also together. I don't feel like there's anything that can happen to me now that could shake my faith. I mean, every time we've had a loss and I have seen the Lord provide and be there for us and comfort us, I just feel like my faith grows deeper. And another big part of this is the comfort that he has given us. We've gotten comfort from other people and from himself. And then we've also been able to share that comfort with others. And the Bible tells us that that's really the design, is that he comforts us so we can comfort others. And I feel like when we do that, we're doing what he made us to do. And so this has kind of turned into a ministry for us, a way for us to turn our pain into help for other people, and just to be there in this community that, like we said, you never want to be a part of, but once you're a part of it, it's made up of the most incredible people. And now we're honored to walk alongside these people in their pain and their loss, and honor their babies too. It's just really been a growing experience that I don't think anything else could have produced this kind of faith in my life.
Right. God has the habit of using pain to really grow us and stretch us. Well, that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to wrap up our time here. But first, I want to give you all the chance to share any resources that you would suggest that have been helpful for you, or maybe that we could point other people in the direction of those resources. So what are some things that have worked for you guys?
I mean, there's been a lot of things kind of over time that have been really helpful for us. One of the things that was actually after we lost Logan, or right around that time, there's a sermon series by Pastor named Andy Stanley out of Atlanta. It's called In the Meantime. And it's really the story of how God is with us through the times in between when, you know, the ending isn't there yet, and you just kind of feel like this is the valley, right? And, you know, the idea behind it is that, you know, during those times, God isn't absent, he isn't apathetic, and he isn't angry, and he walks through, you know, I think it's 6 parts of just kind of showing you that, you know, in Scripture and all throughout Scripture, God promises that those times are there for a reason, and you know, just the value in that. And that's something, it's still up. I mean, you can go, I think it's meantimeseries.org, that they have it posted there, and you can watch the videos for that. That's been good. You know, there's been other scripture that has been really important to us. You know, of course, you know, sometimes it feels like we can identify with Job a lot. You know, he went through a lot of loss, and through it, you know, he kept his faith. You know, even when he didn't have understanding. And, you know, when God confronted him on that and really showed him that, look, he's king of everything. He's king of, you know, the good and the pain. And, you know, his sovereignty doesn't have limits. And, you know, Job really responds to that at the end of the book when he says, you know, I have previously heard stories or rumors of this God, and now I've seen him. And that can be what it feels like sometimes, that, you know, in pain, we can really see who God is, because, you know, this isn't, you know, Paul calls it in 2 Corinthians, you know, this light and momentary affliction, that in comparison to eternity, it is, you know, it's building this eternal weight of glory, he says. And to feel that weight, that, you know, this isn't the world that we were created for. This is, you know, there's things that are broken, and, you know, we're able to see that the one who's overcome the world in Jesus, that's where our hope really is, that he's gonna, you know, it isn't about making this world a better place. It's about pointing to the world to come, that the one who conquered death will, you know, return and wipe away every tear, and that all of this suffering will be worth it.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. And I think that, I mean, that's our hope. That's what we look forward to. You know, what would our hope be apart from Jesus Christ? So thank you for sharing that. Kristi, do you have anything to add?
A book that I read and went through a couple times with different groups of girls is, it's called I Will Carry You, The Sacred Dance of Grief and Joy. And it's by Angie Smith. She just said some things in her book that I felt like I couldn't put words to. She had a loss. They knew that actually they were going to lose their baby when she was born because there were some genetic issues. And they prayed the big prayers and asked for a miracle, and it didn't happen. And that's just the reality sometimes, is that, you know, we ask God to do these things that we know he can do, and sometimes he doesn't. And, you know, that's hard for us to, you know, take a hold of and know that he could have changed it. But also, you know, just the things that she says in that book are amazing. And also Lamentations, like Josh said, we have a lot of scripture that has really been helpful. But if you want to look it up, Lamentations 3:17 through 24 has been really good for me. Like when we think about it, I think growing up, you know, we kind of have the idea through Bible stories that if we do the right thing and we're kind and we do what God asks us to do, that we'll have good things. And the reality is that he actually tells us the opposite is true, that we will have pain and suffering. And there are a ton of scriptures that support people going through that. And even Jesus suffered. And so I think that it is good to read those things in the Bible and know that you're not alone, that we're not the only ones who are going through pain and suffering. If Jesus had to suffer and die to save us from our sin, then we're going to suffer in this life. And so that's just been a comfort to me to read, other people in the Bible going through hard things, even more than we've been through, just to see that is something that we can expect, but also know that the Lord is with us through all of that.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing those resources. And for those of you who are listening, I will list all of the resources in the show notes. So the scripture, the books they've mentioned, and a few websites as well, where you can find additional support if you have walked through pregnancy loss. The very last thing I want to ask, I meant to ask it earlier, but very briefly, what advice would you give to someone who knows someone who has experienced a pregnancy loss? How can they show support to that person without saying things that might be hurtful?
Right. That's tough. So I would say that if you haven't been through the same kind of loss, you can still support a friend or family member. Don't feel like because you haven't been there, you can't be there for them. I think it's really important that people still come alongside these people. Most of my family and friends have not walked through it, and they have been with us through all these years and have been some of our biggest supporters. So don't feel like you can't, even if you haven't been through it. We've all been through loss, so you know what it feels like to suffer or have loss of some kind. But the thing that I would say never to use, and you mentioned this phrase earlier, and I'm glad that you mentioned it, because there is nothing that comes after "at least" when it comes to pregnancy loss that is helpful. Even if it's truth, even if it's biblical, it doesn't matter what you say after that. It's just hurtful. So that phrase, take it out of your vocabulary when you're talking to someone who's been through it, because it makes us feel like our baby didn't really matter as much. And obviously that is hurtful. So, and there are even times that we've had people say, I don't know what to do, and I don't know what to say to help you. And that's completely fine. Yeah. It's fine if you don't know. Tell them that, because a lot of times we don't know what we need when we're going through loss either. And so just be honest about that, but be willing to be there. And for me, the people who checked in on me weeks, months, and even years afterwards are the people who I've really gone to the most for strength and for support, because I feel like they're remembering my baby. It feels like as soon as you have a loss, there are a lot of people supporting you and there for you because it was traumatic and, it just happened. But then it feels like a few months out, people have kind of moved on with their life, but you have not. I felt very stuck in my grief, and I felt like everybody had forgotten about me and my baby. And so people checking in on me months afterwards made me feel like people still remembered my pain and remembered my baby. And that was extremely helpful for me.
And I think that it's also important to remember, don't feel like what you have to say wouldn't be helpful. It's fine to just say, like Kristi said, that you don't know what to say. That, just tell someone, look, I don't know what to say. I want to be here for you. If there's something I can do, please tell me. But, I'm at a loss for words. That's okay. What you have to remember is that, it's easy to assume that someone's got support. We have been just showered with love and support through our family and friends, through our losses. But what we've seen through heartstrings and through talking with other couples is that some couples have no support. Everybody grieves differently. And there have been family members that we've heard of that, won't even acknowledge that someone was pregnant in the past, or are just not supportive just because they don't know how to process it. So, don't assume that someone has the support already. Just a couple words of, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you, could make all the difference.
That's great. And I think that's a good place to end. Josh and Kristi, thank you so much for sharing your story and just for giving some insight and some advice for other women and men who I know are walking through similar grief as you guys have experienced. So for those of you listening, if you haven't subscribed already, be sure to do that so that you can get notifications every time we have new episodes just like these. And we ask you to share and maybe even leave us a review so that other people can benefit from the topics that we're talking about. And especially for this topic, we want to make sure that women and men who are walking through this valley do not feel alone. So thank you so much, and tune in, and we'll be back with a new episode soon. Thanks.